Welcome to This Month in Type 1 Research. Please check the description for the original sources, and all content is general in nature and should not be considered medical advice. Imagine fighting a medical war for, a century, only to realize that for decades we might have been staring at the completely wrong battlefield.
Yeah, which is just a pretty wild realization to come to.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into this massive mountain of literature from April and May 2026. And the findings suggest that the root of type 1 diabetes isn't just starting in the pancreas. It's actually starting in your gut.
Right.
Our mission today is to explore how science is fundamentally redefining what it means to live with, treat, and age with this condition. We're moving way beyond the basics you might be used to.
And the shift in perspective here is just, it's profound. If we look back, the medical community's definition of success for type 1 was incredibly narrow.
Mostly just about survival, right?
Survival and pushing your HbA1c down, that was basically it. The strategy was just to keep blood sugar as close to normal as possible so the patient doesn't develop vascular complications down the road.
Right.
But this new wave of research is moving the goalpost toward this concept called physiological resilience.
Which, sounds like a great buzzword, but let's unpack this. What does physiological resilience actually mean for someone listening to this who wakes up every single morning and has to, manually manage their metabolism?
Well, it means doctors and researchers are finally recognizing that simply forcing an A1C down into the sixes it's a bit of a hollow victory if the person is suffering from immense cognitive burnout.
Yeah, that mental math is exhausting.
Exactly. If they're constantly fighting off severe low blood sugars or dealing with chronic inflammatory stress. The new objective is to restore normal cellular functions, turn down that systemic inflammation, and remove that relentless mental load required just to eat a meal.
So, success is now being measured by your freedom from that cognitive burden, not just the numbers on a lab report. Okay, to get to that kind of resilience, we first have to understand what's actually breaking down at a cellular level. And looking through these recent multi-omic studies, which, by the way, just means researchers are looking at the massive combined data of genes, proteins, and gut bacteria all at once.
Right, the whole picture.
Yeah, the whole picture. And the battleground is shifting. There's this fascinating paper here on molecular mimicry. It basically argues the gut microbiome is the match that lights the fire of this autoimmune attack.
Yeah, the scientific community has known for a long time that genetic susceptibility alone doesn't explain the math.
Right, like why cases are spiking.
Exactly. It can't explain why type 1 incidence is climbing so rapidly worldwide, or why we see it appearing earlier and earlier in childhood. There has to be an environmental trigger. And your gut microbiome is, it's the prime interface between the outside world and your internal immune system.
Makes sense.
So the multi-omics data reveals a very specific chain reaction. It begins with a deficiency in certain gut bacteria that are responsible for producing short-chain fatty acids.
Okay, so these short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, they're essentially the food that keeps the lining of your gut healthy and tightly sealed, right?
They're absolutely vital for gut integrity. When you lack those specific bacteria, you don't have enough SCFAs. So your gut barrier weakens and becomes highly permeable.
Which people usually call a leaky gut.
Right, leaky gut. And when that physical barrier degrades, you simultaneously lose some of your regulatory T cells.
And those are the ones that usually keep things calm.
Yeah, they act like the adults in the room, basically keeping your broader immune system from overreacting. So that compromised state sets the stage for the second part of the mechanism, which is the molecular mimicry.
The molecular mimicry concept is just wild to me. So the researchers isolated specific bacteria in the gut. I think one of them is Parabacteroides distal.
That's the one.
And they found that this bacteria produces peptides that look remarkably similar to human insulin. So wait, our gut bacteria might be accidentally training our immune system to attack our pancreas because the bacterial proteins look like identical twins to our own islet cells.
That's exactly it. The data strongly supports that narrative. Because that gut barrier is compromised, these bacterial peptides, the lookalikes, slip through into the bloodstream.
Wow.
The immune system flags them and mounts a defense. But because those bacterial proteins are practically identical twins to the insulin produced by your own beta cells, the immune system cross-reacts.
It gets confused.
Completely confused. It sends autoreactive T cells straight to the pancreas to destroy the beta cells, fundamentally believing it's still fighting off a gut infection.
It's like the immune system is a bounty hunter that's been handed a wanted poster with the wrong face on it.
That's a great way to put it.
It just goes after the innocent bystander. But the pancreas isn't just sitting there taking it, which brings me to the Exeter study. I want to dive into these pancreatic defenders, the PMSCs.
Ah, yes. Human pancreatic mesenchymal stromal cells. To find these, researchers used multiplex immunohistochemistry.
Which sounds incredibly complicated.
It's basically a way to avoid just grinding up tissue to see what's in it. This technique allows scientists to use fluorescent tags to color code different cells.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they can literally map out the exact microscopic neighborhoods of the pancreas. And what they saw was that while the immune system is launching this misguided attack, the body mounts a localized defense. These PMSCs physically wrap around the surviving insulin-producing islets to shield them.
And it isn't just a physical wall, right? They are actively trying to shut down the attack chemically.
They are. These defending cells express a highly protective factor called annexin A1.
Annexin A1, okay.
You can think of annexin A1 as like a cellular ceasefire flare. It's an immunomodulatory protein that signals the aggressive attacking immune cells to stop firing and stand down.
That's incredible.
The mapping showed that in individuals with type 1, the density of these protective PMSCs was significantly higher around the islets that still had insulin left. It's a desperate, active defense mechanism.
But unfortunately, we know how this story usually ends. The defense eventually gets overwhelmed. However, there was a specific cutout in the data based on the age of diagnosis that really caught my eye.
Yeah, the age factor reveals a lot about the intensity of the disease. The data indicated that if an individual is diagnosed with type 1 at age 13 or older, the density of those protective PMSCs wrapping around their islets is substantially higher than in someone diagnosed under the age of 13.
Wait, why would a teenager or an adult have a stronger cellular shield than a young kid?
It comes down to the toxicity of the environment. In later onset type 1, the inflammatory attack is generally slower and less toxic.
Okay, so they have more time.
Exactly. That allows these protective PMSCs to survive, deploy their ceasefire flares, and actually do their job.
Right.
But in younger children, the immune infiltration is so rapid and aggressive that the defender cells themselves undergo cell death.
Wow.
Yeah, they're simply destroyed before they can protect the beta cells. This gives us a really clear mechanical reason why beta cell loss is much more gradual in adults compared to young children.
That makes perfect sense. And since we are finally understanding that the immune system's confusion and the resulting inflammatory stress are the real targets, the conversation naturally shifts to how we actually treat this. We're moving away from just, handing someone a vial of insulin.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the evolving treatments, starting with the CRISPR research, which honestly feels like we're living in the future.
It really does. We are seeing a massive paradigm shift toward addressing the core disease mechanism. On the advanced cellular engineering side, scientists are using CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to create what they call hypoimmune stem cell-derived beta cells.
Okay, let's break down hypoimmune. How do you make a new lab-grown beta cell invisible to an immune system that is actively hunting for beta cells?
Well, it requires some complex genetic editing. The researchers use CRISPR to delete the specific HLA markers on the surface of the stem cells.
And HLA markers are like...
They're essentially the ID badges that tell your immune system, hey, I belong here. By removing them and then adding in a different protein signal, often CD47, which acts as a don't eat me signal to the immune system, the T cells simply don't recognize the engineered cell as foreign.
That is just mind-blowing.
Early clinical trials are showing instances where patients achieve insulin independence using these cells without needing broad, toxic immunosuppression drugs.
And eliminating the need for those harsh anti-rejection drugs has always been the major hurdle of cell replacement therapy.
Absolutely.
So alongside the stem cell work, we have immunotherapies like teplizumab, which is actively delaying the onset of the disease by neutralizing those confused T cells before they wipe out the pancreas. But I want to pivot to what people are doing right now today.
Because the future isn't quite here yet for everyone.
Right. While we wait for edited stem cells to reach the masses, patients are dealing with the reality of living with a condition. And that increasingly involves using type 2 diabetes drugs like GLP1s and SGLT2 inhibitors alongside their insulin.
Yeah, the trend of using these adjunct therapies is highly prevalent in the latest systematic reviews. And the appeal is very clear. When patients use these medications alongside insulin, we see clinically meaningful weight reduction.
We're talking like, what, a few kilos?
Averaging around 3.6 to 5.1 kilograms. It also allows patients to drastically lower their total daily insulin doses while seeing modest improvements in their time in range on their glucose monitors.
Which logically checks out. I mean, insulin is an anabolic hormone. It promotes growth and fat storage. So if your body requires a huge amount of injected insulin to manage your meals, you often end up with hyperinsulinemia, which drives weight gain.
Precisely.
So taking a drug that lowers your overall insulin requirement mitigates that weight gain. But there's a glaring red flag in this data, specifically regarding those SGLT2 inhibitors.
A very serious clinical caveat, yes. While SGLT2 inhibitors offer significant cardiovascular and kidney protections for people with type 2 diabetes, using them in type 1 comes with a really steep cost. The literature shows they increase the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, with a risk ratio of 2.19. That means the risk of DKA is more than doubled compared to someone not taking the drug.
Hold on. A risk ratio of 2.19 is massive. DKA is a life-threatening emergency. So patients are trying to mitigate the effects of hyperinsulinemia like weight gain by using these adjunct drugs, but they are trading a long-term metabolic risk for a very acute, immediate danger like DKA. That sounds like a terrifying tightrope walk.
It is a delicate balancing act, and it really comes down to how the drug alters your body's plumbing.
How so?
SGLT2 inhibitors work by forcing your kidneys to excrete excess glucose directly into your urine. Because you're peeing out the sugar, your blood glucose drops, which means you need to inject far less insulin.
Okay, that sounds good in theory, but
But the danger is that if your circulating insulin levels drop too low, your cells can't get any energy. Your body panics, thinks it is starving, and starts rapidly burning fat for fuel.
which dumps highly acidic ketones into your blood.
Exactly.
And the terrifying part is, your blood sugar monitor might say you are perfectly fine.
That is the insidious nature of euglycemic DKA. Because the drug is constantly flushing the glucose out of your system, your blood sugar levels look normal. You are stripped of the usual early warning sign of DKA, which is sky-high blood sugar.
Wow.
Yeah, a patient can feel fine looking at their monitor while their blood is quietly becoming dangerously acidic.
That really illustrates the incredible burden of daily management and this intense desire to stabilize blood sugars and reduce insulin needs is the exact same motivation driving a massive lifestyle trend we need to cover, the ketogenic diet in youth.
Oh, yes. The intersection of strict dietary intervention and pediatric type 1 is easily one of the most debated topics in current endocrinology. We're seeing a significant wave of parents initiating highly restrictive ketogenic diets for their children.
And to be clear, we aren't taking sides on diet wars here, but you can absolutely see the logic. If carbohydrates are what cause the blood sugar to spike, then stripping them out entirely seems like the most direct way to get a perfectly flat line on a continuous glucose monitor.
The desire for stability is entirely valid, and the observational data confirms that maintaining the regimen can indeed lead to very tight glycemic stability and drastically lowered insulin requirements.
There's a catch.
A big one. We have to look impartially at the developmental mechanics highlighted in these clinical reviews. Putting a child's developing body into constant ketosis presents severe physiological hurdles.
Let's get into the mechanics of those risks. What actually happens to a child's body when you remove those carbs?
Well, there are three primary concerns in the literature. First is dyslipidemia, which means throwing off the balance of cholesterol and triglycerides in the blood.
Yeah.
Second is a high susceptibility to sudden severe hypoglycemia. Normally, your liver stores backup glucose, called glycogen, to dump into your bloodstream if your sugar drops too low.
Like an emergency reserve.
Yeah. Exactly. A strict keto diet depletes those liver glycogen stores, essentially removing the child's natural safety net against a severe crash. But the third and most developmentally concerning is slowed linear growth.
Wait, let's unpack that. Why would a low-carb diet stunt a child's physical growth? Is it just a lack of calories?
No, it's deeper than just calories. It's about the hormones. As we mentioned earlier, insulin is a primary growth hormone.
Right.
It works directly with IGF-1, another critical growth factor, to signal the body to build bone and tissue. When you completely remove carbohydrates, you suppress the body's need for insulin to the absolute bare minimum.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, by keeping insulin that low, you are inadvertently suppressing the vital hormonal signals a child's body requires to grow taller and develop normally. You might achieve a flat line on the glucose monitor, but you risk stunting their physical development.
Which is why major medical bodies are so hesitant.
Right. They currently state there is insufficient safety data to recommend this approach for youth without intense, specialized medical supervision.
It's just a profound trade-off. All of these strategies, from adjusting kidney drugs to fundamentally altering a child's metabolic pathways, highlight how much manual effort goes into overriding this disease. And that daily cognitive burden gets exponentially heavier when you introduce extreme physiological stressors.
Which brings us to how managing type 1 evolves through extreme life stages. Let's talk about pregnancy.
Pregnancy with type 1 remains one of the most complex clinical scenarios in medicine. The sheer volatility of it is staggering.
These are the hormones, right?
Absolutely. In the early weeks, patients often become extremely sensitive to insulin. But by the later trimesters, the placenta is pumping out hormones that create massive, stubborn insulin resistance.
And the current standard of care for most people, automated insulin delivery, or AID systems, they can actually struggle with this, don't they?
They do. AID systems use algorithms to read continuous glucose data and automatically adjust insulin delivery. For non-pregnant people, they are phenomenal, but they are inherently conservative. Their primary programming is to prevent severe lows.
Right, safety first. But when a pregnant person hits that wall of placental insulin resistance, the algorithm often hits the brakes on delivering insulin right when the patient needs massive amounts of it.
So what do patients and doctors even do in that situation?
We are seeing a major trend of off-label use of these aid systems. Clinicians and patients are essentially hacking the intended use.
Hacking it.
Yeah, they are setting incredibly aggressive blood sugar targets and manually overriding the algorithms to force the system to handle the unique metabolic demands of gestation. It requires intense adjustments, but it's allowing people to achieve the incredibly tight control required for a safe pregnancy without the crushing burnout of doing the math manually 24/7.
It's amazing that technology can act as an adaptive artificial pancreas to safely bring a new life into the world. But the irony of all these medical advancements keeping people alive and thriving is that we are now facing complications that doctors 50 years ago rarely had to consider.
That's very true.
We're seeing a massive new demographic of people aging into their 70s and 80s with type 1 diabetes.
And geriatric type 1 is a frontier that is finally getting the attention it deserves. For decades, research on aging and diabetes almost exclusively focused on type 2. But the recent publication of the All of Us cohort study has given us staggering new insights.
They looked at the electronic health records of over 283,000 participants in the U.S., right?
Yes, and they specifically built a validated algorithm using medical encounter codes and C-peptide values to separate out the type 1 patients from the type 2 patients.
Which gives us a much clearer picture.
Precisely distinguishing between the two is what makes this data so vital. What's fascinating here is when researchers looked at the incidence of dementia, the findings were sobering. We already know that type 2 diabetes increases dementia risk. In this specific cohort, people with type 2 had a hazard ratio of 2.08 compared to the non-diabetic population.
So they are about twice as likely to develop dementia.
Yes. But for individuals with type 1, the incident dementia risk was significantly worse. Their hazard ratio was 2.82.
Wait, really? That is nearly 3 times the risk of developing dementia compared to someone without diabetes.
Nearly 3 times, exactly.
So let's put that in perspective for someone listening who might be feeling a spike of anxiety hearing that number. If managing T1D is like manually flying a complex airplane every single day of your life, calculating carbohydrate ratios, tracking active insulin times, adjusting for stress and exercise, what happens when the pilot's reflexes and cognition naturally start to slow down? How do we adapt the cockpit, the medical technology for older adults facing cognitive decline?
That analogy perfectly captures the crisis the geriatric diabetes community is trying to solve. You cannot expect a patient who is experiencing early-stage memory loss to safely troubleshoot a pump failure or accurately calculate a correction bolus.
A single mistake with insulin is acutely life-threatening.
It is. The research emphasizes that we must completely shift our clinical approach for older adults. The goal has to move away from perfectly tight blood sugar control and pivot entirely to safety and simplification.
Meaning we need to change what good looks like.
Exactly. For a 30-year-old, targeting an A1C of 6.5% might be appropriate to prevent long-term eye or kidney disease, but for an 80-year-old with mild cognitive impairment, the acute danger of a severe low blood sugar causing a fall or a seizure heavily outweighs the benefit of a lower A1C.
That makes total sense.
This data is a rallying cry to integrate routine cognitive baseline testing into standard diabetes care early on, so families and doctors can simplify the technology interfaces and establish safety nets before the pilot's reflexes slow down too much.
It really hammers home why the new goal is physiological resilience. It is about treating the whole human being, protecting their brain, and reducing their daily burden across their entire lifespan.
And looking at that lifespan leads to a lingering question the scientific community is just starting to confront.
Oh, what's that?
Let's say we achieve the ultimate goal tomorrow. Let's say we use CRISPR-edited stem cells to give a patient a perfectly functioning invisible pancreas. They never need an insulin injection again. What happens to their body's metabolic memory?
Metabolic memory. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, decades of navigating severe high and low blood sugars, combined with the unnatural exposure to injected synthetic insulin, leaves a permanent biological footprint.
Right.
It alters the epigenetic marks on your DNA. It stiffens the vascular system. And as we just saw with the dementia data, it leaves a lasting legacy on the brain's architecture. Restoring insulin production cures the pancreas, but how will medical science go back and erase the invisible, lingering footprints the disease has already left on an aging brain?
So a cure for the organ might not instantly cure the legacy of the disease.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating thought to leave on. If we successfully cure T1D tomorrow using CRISPR and stem cells, what happens to the body's metabolic memory? Curing the pancreas might restore insulin, but how will medical science address the invisible, lingering footprints the disease leaves on the aging brain? Remember to like and subscribe, follow the link in the channel description to buy me a coffee, and thank you for listening.